The impeachment powers assigned to the Congress by the Constitution cannot be defeated by a president who decides to run away or trashes our democracy on the way out the door. This trial will confirm that fact.
2 impeachments in less than 2 years. Former United States President Donald Trump stands accused of inciting an insurrection against his own government in an attempt to overturn the results of a free and fair election. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Donald Trump's unprecedented second impeachment trial kicks off on Tuesday in the U.S. Senate. He's the first American president to be impeached twice. It's also the first time an impeachment trial is being held against a former president. Democrats and Republicans are expected to spar over the constitutionality of the trial and whether Trump's words provoked a mob of supporters to charge the U.S. Capitol. Most projections are that Trump will be acquitted a second time, with few Republicans signaling a willingness to vote to convict the former president. For more on the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, let's go to our correspondent, Philip Crowther. Philip, what can we expect in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, days, yes. Weeks, not necessarily, because we do expect things to go rather quickly here during the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. We expect that this could last maybe all the way into the end of this week, possibly into the beginning of next week. We are getting a few more details as to the structure of what we'll be seeing starting this Tuesday. This Tuesday will be the start of the former president's trial, but it will begin with a debate about the constitutionality of the whole thing. As you just mentioned, Donald Trump's lawyers believe that he, as a private citizen now, and they're really insisting on that he is a private citizen, cannot be impeached and certainly cannot be seen as guilty by the jurors in this Senate trial, the jurors being the 100 senators that are in the U.S. Senate. So that will be the first part before we even begin really with the true arguments that start on Wednesday. What you'll see in the U.S. Senate will be the 9 impeachment managers. They are Democrats, essentially the prosecution. They'll be making the case for the president being responsible for inciting an insurrection, and after that you'll be hearing from the lawyers of the former president. Both groups get 16 hours altogether. That's 2 whole days, essentially. Now, back to what I said at the beginning, we expect this to go really, really quickly. Now, why is that? It's because both sides essentially agree on that for different reasons, though. Republicans want this to go quickly because they believe the result is a foregone conclusion, an acquittal of former President Donald Trump. And then the other side, well, Democrats want to get this done as quickly as possible, rather as soon as possible, while the memories are still fresh of the 6th of January, but they also want to move on as quickly as possible to other legislative priorities in the U.S. Senate, those coming from the new Biden administration.
Philip, we have been here before, about a year ago, in fact. How is this impeachment trial different from the first one?
Well, before we start with that, let me tell you first why this is very similar to the last one, and that's because we do believe that it's going to have the same result, an acquittal of Donald Trump. This time, of course, it would be the acquittal of the former president, rather than last time it was the acquittal of the president in function at the time. Here are the big differences, though. We expect this to be a lot faster because of the reasons I just gave you, but others as well, because there doesn't have to be all of these explanations about documents, where a phone call with the Ukrainian president might have come from. It's just going to be less detailed. Why? Because it's also more visceral. All of these senators should remember what happened on the 6th of January. We also expect this to be much more visual. There will be videos used of what happened on the day. It is simply much simpler to understand this impeachment trial than the last one. It's also going to look different, by the way, because the last impeachment trial, you might remember, well, that was before COVID-19. This time you'll see that senators won't be sitting close to each other. No, they'll have some significant social distance between them, and in fact not all of them will even have a space on the Senate floor. So things are going to look different, but again, back to what I said at the start, we do expect the results to be pretty much a foregone conclusion. One should never jump to that kind of a conclusion, but both Republicans and Democrats, they seem to be pretty sure that this is going to lead to the acquittal of Donald Trump again.
Thanks, Philip. That's Philip Crowther reporting from Capitol Hill. Well, let's bring in our panel right now. Joining us from New York, Jadan Horyn is a writer and conservative commentator. Also in New York, Erin Mattei is host of Pushback with Erin Mattei on the Grayzone. From Chevy Chase, Maryland, Joel Rubin served as a Deputy U.S. Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama administration. And with us here in Washington, D.C., Bruce Fein is a constitutional lawyer and author who helped write the impeachment articles against U.S. President Bill Clinton. Welcome to all of you. And Bruce Fein, let me start with you. As we just heard from our correspondent there, it seems that the outcome of this case is a foregone conclusion. There would have to be 67 votes in the U.S. Senate to convict. And at this stage, there doesn't seem to be that required number. So do you see any merit in proceeding with a case when we know what the outcome is going to be?
Well, the House of Representatives under the Constitution has an obligation to vote articles of impeachment by simple majority. They're not to speculate on whether or not the Senate would return a verdict of guilty, which requires a 2/3 vote. Articles of impeachment require simple majority. But there's certainly an educational factor if the House managers take advantage of it in explaining how threatening Mr. Trump's actions were to our constitutional system. The gist of what he was doing, whether he in fact incited the riot, because it was predated by efforts repeatedly for months, including an audio call to the Secretary of State of Georgia to get election returns falsified because contrary to what courts had decided, in order to deny Joe Biden the presidential victory. And indeed, with the date that we're talking about, January 6th, the purpose of his objection to the counting of the votes by his vice president, which is to count the votes, not to second guess them, was that he was following the 12th Amendment and his constitutional obligation, and Mr. Trump didn't want him to do that. So he was attacking our constitutional system for peaceful transfers of presidential power. And that's a very important understanding to pass on to the American people, whether or not there's conviction or acquittal.
Joel Rubin, what is your view on the merits of this case? Unlike other trials which we see, this is essentially a political process that we're seeing right here. And at a time when the new president of the United States, Joe Biden, has been calling for unity, doesn't this process run the risk of deepening divisions in the country?
Well, Anand, I actually think that this is a critical part of healing our country, that what the president former President Trump did, was attack our Constitution. He attacked our ability to have a peaceful transfer of power, as Mr. Fein mentioned, and he essentially told America that he doesn't care for our system of government, and that is an impeachable offense. Clearly, it was impeached, and clearly he violated his oath. So as a country, we need to make sure that we are clear about the facts. We need to make sure that the American people understand what it is that he poses as a threat and an ongoing threat to our government in the future, which is why I think it's very important to have this trial in the Senate. This is a trial not about evicting him from office. He's gone. But it's about ensuring that he doesn't have the ability to run again in the future and create more havoc in the future. That is well within the constitutional purview of the Senate to do, and that's why they're taking this up.
Just on that point of whether the president, or the former president rather, could run in the future, Joel, he would have to be convicted first, and then there would have to be another vote on whether he could hold any kind of public office after that. It's unlikely that either of those things are going to happen, are they?
Well, it may not pass. You're right. They may not meet the threshold of 2/3, but certainly there's a good argument for it. The American people need to understand that this is an individual who, for months upon months, led a misinformation campaign in the United States, a disinformation campaign, that is, to ensure that he could then lead a charge, as he did, to try to block the certification of the legitimate vote of the American people. And that is not the kind of behavior we want in our commander-in-chief and in people who swear an oath to the Constitution.
Jadan Horyn, the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who's also a very prominent voice in Republican politics, he's been talking about the trial on United States television over the past weekend. This is some of what he had to say. Let's listen.
I think I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to end the impeachment trial because I think it's blatantly unconstitutional. I'm ready to get on with trying to solve the nation's problems. And as to Donald Trump, he is the most popular figure in the Republican Party. He had a consequential presidency. January the 6th was a very bad day for America, and he'll get his share of blame in history. But I do believe that in 2022, the Republican Party is going to come roaring back.
Jadan, the outcome of the trial may be a foregone conclusion, and if we take away really the letter of the law, what we're going to be seeing over the next few days, if we look at the charges, it's going to hurt Trump, isn't it?
I really don't think it will. What's going to happen is that the American people are going to see two different narratives. One is that the attack was pre-planned and that our intelligence agencies failed in preparing and ensuring that our elected officials knew and had information in advance. And then you're going to see a narrative that Donald Trump incited it. And you can't have two things be true at the same time. And the fact of the matter is, we know that Donald Trump's rhetoric on that day was unacceptable and unfortunate. And we have talked about that numerous times. Republicans across the board have denounced what occurred on that day. But there are two central questions here, and that is the constitutionality of convicting someone after they're in office, one, and two, free speech. We certainly have elected representatives now that say inane things, that say untrue things, that lie all the time to their constituents, and Congress does not see fit to hold them accountable. Now, they did for the first time in a very long time with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but for the most part, representatives can say things that are patently untrue. And you know, our political process works itself out where we let the voters have a say. And the voters had a say in November. They elected Joe Biden. Donald Trump is no longer president. So what this reveals is that impeachment is inherently a partisan political exercise. And frankly, all it's going to do is create a martyr out of Donald Trump. It's going to do the very thing that Joel said it would do, but in the opposite. It'll increase Trump's standing and pull with the base because it'll marry them to him because people run to people's defense. It's a natural instinct.
All right, Jadan, you know, when you say what Donald Trump said on that day was unacceptable, is that just a benign way, when we say use the word unacceptable, and you use that word, is that just a benign way of saying incitement?
No, because I think those are two separate things. I mean, I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I couldn't tell you the legal definition. But I can say, you know, telling a group of people that the vice president is, you know, treasonous or is basically turning on their own president is certainly not beneficial to the body politic. It doesn't do anything to lower the temperature of what is going on, but at the same time, you know, it is not a direct threat contemporaneously saying, you know, go kill the vice president. And I think absent that evidence, if such evidence is presented, you know, then that definitely changes everything. But I don't think it will be. So the foregone conclusion makes this what it is.
I respect Jaden's view, but he sent that tweet out about Vice President Pence when the Capitol was being stormed by rioters. He didn't send out any notice of be careful, stop, save people's lives. And free speech doesn't mean that one can yell fire in a crowded movie theater. You don't get that luxury when you're the commander-in-chief. You have to observe the Constitution, the oath of your office. And he sent that mob up to the Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power.
Okay, let me go to Aaron Mattei in New York. Aaron, of course, those words that Donald Trump said on that day, they were slammed by the Democrats, but they were also criticized by Republicans as well, including the current U.S. Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who said that President Trump had, to use McConnell's words, provoked the assault on the Capitol. And President Trump's lawyers are saying that what we're seeing right now, they're slamming this trial as, quote, political theater. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some truth to it when it comes to people like Mitch McConnell, who, I don't think it's a secret, has no love for Donald Trump and wants to see his movement purged from his party. So I think that explains why McConnell has been on board with this. There are a lot of problems here. You know, Trump, I think, did commit impeachable offenses, but my worry is that the focus on him lets other people off the hook. So, for example, if, as was said before, if U.S. intelligence officials in the sprawling national security state had done their job, there would not have been a mob for Trump to incite, no matter what he said. The fact that this was a massive intelligence failure. And for all the effort that is being put into this impeachment trial, I'm not seeing the same level of energy and enthusiasm from either party to investigate the intelligence officials who let this happen. I think that's a very big mistake.
Bruce Fein, does that weaken the case a little bit, the fact that others are not being held accountable? As we just heard, the intelligence establishment in this country, for one.
Well, it's a little bit like saying because we had an intelligence failure about 9/11, then we should ignore the terrorists. Really? The fact is that the culprit was Mr. Trump. And to elaborate on what was said previously, the crowd was chanting, and Mr. Trump was watching, "Hang Mike Pence. Hang Mike Pence," which is a crime itself. And Mr. Trump has never repudiated the crowd for chanting those threatening words to attempt to kill his vice president. Indeed, even as the violence, the storming of the Capitol, the insurrection was unfolding, and he knew what was happening, he could have gone on immediately and said, "Stop, I repudiate you. You are not me." He ended up belatedly issuing some saccharine statement at about 80,000 feet saying, in general, I don't like violence, you're great patriots, but maybe you should go home. But he never repudiated them. Now that's quite something. Hang Mike Pence? That's something we think about in Tiananmen Square in Moscow with Mr. Putin. That's not the United States of America. And if you're indifferent to that kind of chant as a president, you should no longer be in office or ever occupy office again. We are not going to be Russia or China ever if we're going to maintain our Constitution.
Aaron Mate, is that a fair comparison that Bruce just made, referring to the 9/11 attacks?
No, it's not, because Trump didn't plan the mob. According to most accounts, some people were planning this for a long time. Trump encouraged them, and Trump acted in a really reprehensible way in refusing to accept the results of the election, trying to intimidate the Georgia Secretary of State, making that speech, taking a long time to repudiate it. But he did not orchestrate or plan this attack. And I think unfortunately, that's going to be something that comes up in this trial, where you're not going to have a direct line between Trump and the actual people who committed the violence. They were certainly inspired by him, but he did not plan the attack. And I think that's an important distinction to make, if we're going to be honest.
He called on them to come to Washington on January 6th and said it was going to be wild, and spent months and months stating disinformation about the actual results of the election.
That's so true, because attorneys are also going to say that he called for a peaceful protest on that day. We'll use that.
They can make up whatever excuses they want. He spent months promoting disinformation about the election and telling his people that the election was stolen and they needed to fight. This is also I do.
So did Stacey Abrams. I mean, I think we know that.
No.
Okay, one moment.
They do parody and they do say lies. We cannot
Jaden, one moment.
people for their lies.
All right, Jaden, one moment. Okay,
there was no.
Joel, finish your thought, Joel. I'll get to you, Jaden. Joel, go ahead.
There was no storming of the Georgia State Capitol that Stacey Abrams called for, and that's a smear. And what I do want to say is that we should look at the intelligence community and the Defense Department, because there are reports that the Defense Department withheld sending troops, National Guard troops, authorization. Why was that? Donald Trump was president of that Defense Department. What did they hold back? There's a lot more here that I think we're going to learn.
All right, Jadan Horyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the real tragedy of this entire process is that we know that the president, the rhetoric that he said was entirely reprehensible, and ultimately the only holding accountable that's going to occur is that he was impeached. He will not be convicted. He will not be barred from future office. And because impeachment consumes Congress, the regulatory and oversight powers that were alluded to before in this conversation will not be pursued because the Biden administration will want to move forward. Ultimately, we need to understand what happened and how it happened and how we had such an enormous lapse within our own security apparatus. But unfortunately, by making this politicized, by making this political and focusing on Trump, Democrats are losing that, and there's a desire of the country to move forward. So instead of what we having after 9/11 occurred, where we actually investigated it for years, I really don't see any energy on either side talking about creating such commissions to look to what happened.
All right, Bruce Fein, we've been talking about what the president said and what kind of impact it may or may not have had on that mob that went up on Capitol Hill. But there is another issue which the president's lawyers are calling into question, and that is the constitutionality of this trial. The president has already left office, and the ultimate sanction for this, if the president is convicted, is removal from office. But he's already out of office.
Well, the ultimate sanction is not removal from office. It's forbidden to hold any future federal office. We do have a precedent. In 1876, there's a Secretary of War called Henry Belknap. He resigned even before the House voted impeachment articles. The articles went to the Senate for trial. Mr. Belknap argued there's no jurisdiction because I'm no longer in office. The Senate voted against the argument, 37 to 29. We've already had it. It's quite clear that under the Constitution, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, the Senate is the final word on this issue. And there'll be a majority of the Senate will say, yes, the reason why this remains viable is because there is a sanction to be imposed. It's not a frivolous sanction. It's a sanction that has twofold impacts. One, it can deprive Mr. Trump of any opportunity to occupy the White House a second time.
Right.
And secondly, it sets a standard. It sets a precedent that says any president in the future that does X, Y, Z is going to be impeached and removed from office so that it has a deterrent effect. And one of the things that I think is obvious to everyone, we have a president who even 2 years ago said, he boasted, and then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president. A president saying, basically, I'm flouting my oath to support the Constitution because I'm saying I'm above the law, something that only kings and monarchs and dictators say. That by itself has to be brought home to the American people. We cannot afford to roll the dice every day with a president who thinks he's above the law.
All right, Aaron Mate, let's look at the politics of this. I mean, this is taking place at a time in an environment of the coronavirus pandemic. The death toll in this country could soon be 500,000 in just a few weeks. We know that millions of people are out of work right now or underemployed. Businesses are struggling. Many of them have closed. And I'm just wondering, if the Democrats put too much of an emphasis on this trial and what they want to do to Donald Trump, could this process backfire on them?
I think that's a major concern, and it comes against a backdrop of where Democrats essentially won the Senate by taking Georgia on a promise of $2,000 survival checks. What did they immediately do? They immediately started walking it back, saying it's really $1,400 when you add the $600 that was recently sent out. And they're also talking about changing the recipient level for it. So if you make a certain amount of income, that's when you're only allowed to get it. I think it's very dangerous politics, especially now to be focusing on something else instead of that. But you know what? I have to say something in response to what Bruce Fein said before. He said that we're not Russia and China. I agree with that. Unlike Russia and China, we actually support violent coups around the world. And what's interesting here is that Trump is being held to account for inciting this insurrection. But he has not been held to account for example, trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela with a violent coup and brutal sanctions that kill Venezuelan children. And that's part of my problem with this, is that Trump's worst crimes, whether it's actively trying to foment a coup in Venezuela or supporting Saudi mass murder in Yemen, those are not being held to account. It's only this one-day thing on a questionable legal rationale that he's being targeted for. And I think, you know, that just raises questions about really who we really uphold the rule of law for.
Okay, Bruce, quick response from you, and then I want to get to Joe.
Well, I'm not denying that there are further impeachable offenses in my judgment. I certainly agree that we now go around the world in search of monsters to destroy. Look what we did in Libya. We went in, overthrew Gaddafi, he gets murdered, 2 million refugees flying over the Mediterranean, weapons spewed all throughout Africa and the Middle East, and there's no accountability at all. But that goes back, it's not just Mr. Trump, that's Mr. Obama, Mr. Bush, his predecessor. Our presidents are doing all sorts of war crimes with impunity, which is appalling to me. But, you know, there's limited things you can do in one impeachment trial. We can't claim that it's supposed to be a panacea and our salvation for every ill under the Constitution that is multiplied you know, like rabbits over the last several decades.
Joel, I want to get back to what we were talking about a moment ago, and that is the political risks for the Democrats in this trial. Is there likelihood that this could backfire on them?
Well, there certainly are risks, but it's an obligation. It's a sworn oath obligation to engage in this impeachment trial because the president committed impeachable offenses and attacked the Constitution of the United States. Hopefully it won't go so far as to undermine the ability of the Congress to actually work on the coronavirus. Republicans were holding back for months and months and months on providing any new package of relief, and that's why Mitch McConnell lost the Senate. Joe Biden has pushed forward a nearly $2 trillion plan. I think the Democrats are going to move that forward alone if necessary, and Republicans will have to watch as the American people applaud it. So I think we'll have the trial. It'll go a week or so, but clearly Joe Biden has been prioritizing COVID relief as his #1 ask.
All right, Jadan Horyn, I said this, we were looking at whether this could backfire on Democrats. I mean, could it also backfire on Republicans? When we look at the circumstances under which this trial is taking place right now, as I pointed out, the country is battling a pandemic right now, and Republicans are being accused of blocking efforts by President Biden to get a bipartisan consensus on a stimulus bill. This is what the White House press secretary had to say, Jen Psaki. Let's listen.
16 of 21 reconciliation bills in the past have received bipartisan support. And the ideas in this package, the proposals in this package, have broad support from Democrats, Republicans, and independents across the country. So I would pose the question back to Republicans. Why aren't you supporting what the vast majority of the public supports?
Doesn't the press secretary have a point there, Jaden?
She does, but at the same time, Republican senators did approach the president with a plan that ultimately the president decided that he wanted his larger plan. And frankly, I mean, this is what the American people elected Democrats to have complete and total control of power to do, which is to have their plan pushed forward, and they have the votes, they believe that they have reconciliation, then they ought to do it, and they shouldn't be shaming Republicans into supporting something when Democrats weren't willing to compromise. Right. The fact of the matter is they possibly don't believe they have the votes. And so really this is about applying pressure to Republicans to do something that they believe and that multiple economists believe could ultimately be detrimental to the U.S. economy moving beyond this. Okay. Republicans have been strong on making sure that the economy gets back on its strength footing, and that the jobs are back there for the American people when we move into a post-pandemic world.
Aaron Matta, I've only got 30 seconds. Donald Trump, as we've been saying, is the first and only president to have been impeached twice. But is there a risk that this impeachment process could be used as a political weapon in the future? Whichever parties in the majority in Congress could use it if the sitting president comes from another party.
Impeachment is a political, not legal process, and I think certainly the Trump presidency has established a norm where everyone is willing to use the government for their political ends. The Democrats used the Mueller investigation to try to basically reverse Trump's victory and undermine him. Trump certainly used the government for his own ends as well. So I do think, yes, this is the new reality that we are living with.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.